Hello, Brobs. Back with the Bürgermeister's daughter scandal of the 16th century German town. We return to chapter, whatever this is, page 152. Against womanly discipline and honor. Oh, there's too many books stacked there. I can't read this anymore. Hold on. There we go, Brobs. Against womanly discipline and honor. 3 days after entering the agreement with their siblings on October 19, 1543, Anna, in a separate document, formally renounced any further claim to a family inheritance. She swore knowingly, finally, and irrevocably, as most people say, but I say irrevocably because it evokes feeling, shall we say, to abide by the terms of the agreement under no circumstances to contest it. Finality, however, can only be a relative term for one whose back was as flat against the wall as Anna's. It's also against the bed, if you know what I mean. At the time of the signing, she could hardly have done otherwise. The agreement was the only way to bide her time. Before half a year had passed, she was again in full cry, and the agreement on the verge of collapse. As new charges and countercharges flew back and forth among the three, her siblings threatened her with arrest, and a new embittered round of litigation loomed. Maybe they should have just imprisoned her again for 6 months. It had been the city council's responsibility to enforce the agreement. When it now reconstructed the events leading to its collapse, the finger pointed solely to Anna. Because of her indiscipline, it alleged, she became unhappy with the terms of the agreement, condemned it, and abandoned Hall for Neuenstein in the country of Hohenlohe. There, again, as she had done in the past, she found refuge with one of the city's major enemies, whose royal family she had evidently earlier gotten to know through her Rothenburg family and Erasmus. Forgot about Erasmus. I forgot all about that little fella. Even without prior context, the Counts of Hohenlohe would likely have welcomed a refugee from Hall in the early 1540s. Between 1538 and 1544, feuding between the city and the county, which occupied much of the land to the north, had increased, and the year 1543 was something of a watershed in this long, bitter conflict. Boundaries and royal escort duty were the staples of that conflict. In 1538, Count Georg I dated death 1551 of Hohenlohe and Waldenberg sparked in an armed confrontation after hacking through the Haller boundary hedge for a third time. Then, in 1542, his brother, Count Albrecht III, death 1551, I don't know why I'm having such trouble with, died of Hohenlohe-Neuenstein, triggered another series of confrontations when he approached the city with his knights to escort King Ferdinand I. There's some crackhead sits out in the street out above in front of me. I love that I'm reading this book on 16th century German history while crackheads live across the street. King Ferdinand I, or the One, as we say, died 1564, then visiting in Hall to the seat of the imperial government in Speyer, and was rebuffed by the Haller when he reached their borders. The two sides thereafter raided one another's territory for months. Albrecht on one occasion occupying a church on Hall land and declaring it his own, the Haller on another attacking a Hohenlohe castle, and both sides sparing no opportunity to insult and threaten the other. In January 1543, the two sides held a 2-week peace conference in an effort to resolve their differences. However, by mid-century, the accustomed cycle of feuding and negotiation had begun anew. Anna, however, did not remain long in Neuenstein, a place of mixed memories of time spent with Erasmus. Having mustered her resources, she was soon off to Speyer to explore afresh her legal options. As she did so, her whole critics accused her of acting not only against womanly discipline and honor, but against her duty as a citizen of Hull. Showing some of her father's flair for the dramatic, she denounced her brother and the city council both publicly and privately to any spare official who would listen, making something of a spectacle of herself. At the same time, she wrote contemptuous letters back home to both, which her brother and council members were later all too happy to share with the imperial commissioners adjudicating her complaints. Such provocative actions eventually moved Philip and Agatha to sue her for defamation, and the city council to summon her home to Hull to answer for her reckless behavior. By a coincidence, Maternus Verzelman, Hull's lordly city secretary, was also in Speyer at this time, and learning of her activities, he sought to calm her on Hull's behalf. Earlier had been the major draftsman of the agreement with her siblings and was one of the two officials designated by the city council to advise her during the deliberations. It was he who had put the quill in Anna's hand when she signed the agreement. Because of his political stature and the seemingly amicable nature of their previous relationship, he evidently believed he might influence her behavior. To that end, he invited Anna, her new lawyer Ludwig Ziegler, and an unidentified friend of her late husband to meet privately and informally with a delegation from Hull in his Speyer lodging. The meeting occurred in March 1544 and is described by Verzelman, in a letter he sent shortly thereafter to the city council of Hull to warn his colleagues of a newly militant Anna. As Verzelman remembered the event, he began the meeting by asking Anna why she was troubling herself and so many others over the agreement with her siblings. According to his account, she responded with loud, rude screams, attacking the leader of the delegation and declaring the agreement to have been a deception from the start, and one she now had no intention of honoring. Specifically, she complained that her siblings had refused to pay her creditors, and that even as she spoke, the Jew Moses of Bayingen, a moneylender to whom she was much in debt, was hotly pursuing her. Is that his actual name, Jew Moses? Because of such hounding, she felt like a cornered person, ready to flee on a moment's notice, lest she be thrown in jail for some delinquent debt. As for her present plans, she intended to appeal the agreement to the imperial court in Rottweil in the hope of having it overturned and the matter of her inheritance reopened. That prospect greatly annoyed the delegation, as it would mean, oh no, buddy, we're lost now. I have no clue where I'm at. There we are. That prospect greatly annoyed the delegation, as it would mean another intrusion by an outside court into the city's domain and still another public washing of its dirty laundry. Attempting to deflate Anna and console the delegation, two councilmen commented that since fleeing Hull, she had found a fat bone elsewhere, an apparent allusion to Neuenstein and her Hohenlohe friends and protectors, and so she would not be residing again in Hull anyway. It was further pointed out in her presence that her brother had said she was crazy, and as a crazy person, no pledge, oath, or agreement she made could possibly bind her. The delegation also threatened to destroy her Junker seal, that is, to debase her social standing, her credentials as the widow of a nobleman, an action her deceased husband's friend had come to warn them against. If such comments had been intended to take the wind out of Anna's sails, they rather filled them instead. She informed the delegation that, could she relive the day in the council room when she signed that agreement with her siblings, knowing them all that she knew now, she would dispense with every semblance of womanly courtesy, and in the presence of your honors squat down in the middle of the council room and politely perform the coarsest bodily act. And with that eye-popping declaration, she denounced the agreement as a thing born of evil, which she assured the delegation was also her opinion of her father's vaunted property and his marriage to her mother, At this point in the proceedings, Ozment, who was accustomed to deference, particularly from women, became unnerved. The agreement remained fully binding on all parties, he now informed Anna. She had entered into it freely and knowingly in the presence of her relatives. Its creation had been a kindness and a mercy to her on the part of her family and the city council. Had her inheritance remained what her father had prescribed, she would have been unable to pay her creditors and become a pauper. So if by her own petulance she now broke the agreement, her brother could not in the future be expected to intervene on her behalf when her creditors sued her, and much less could she blame the city when such misfortunes befell her. For all these reasons, her rude and shameless behavior before the delegation was condemned as completely inappropriate. She was, after all, talking to men who had shown her and her late husband every favor, goodwill, and paternal consideration. If any honor still remained in her, she should rather be showing shame in the delegation's presence. Indeed, Anna's shaken host now proclaimed, when one continues to show ruling authority such insult and offense, it is time for a rock around the neck and into the water. Or you could just lock her up in your house for 6 months. What had never been a discussion now threatened to become a brawl, and Anna again rose to the challenge. She declared in her intention to take as her second husband the most unprincipled man she could find, but one who also had a sharp and cunning mind, by which she meant a man capable of working her will through the courts and giving the councilmen of Hall grief. That threat made a lasting impression on the delegation, as well it should, for a woman living in the 16th century, Anna Buschler had made a remarkable public confession, and one most prejudicial to her case. Such arrogance, vulgarity, and anger in a public forum were associated this time with witches, not with honorable women and loyal citizens. We finally come to the word witch. Wherever she was found, the female witch had an abundance of quality, the Scottish witch hunters called smedum, by which was meant spirit, a refusal to be put down, quarrelsomeness. After the members of the whole delegation had returned home, Anna's words were soon on every holler's lips. Here was a woman who would marry purely for revenge, who was prepared to call an unprincipled paladin husband. And it was no foolish or deranged character in some player carnival troupe who was making such declarations, but the Bürgermeister's daughter, and she was doing so in the presence of the city's most honorable men. The damning phrase, spitzig and Kopf, sharp and cunning of mind, subsequently appeared in the city's legal papers against Anna, and many witnesses remembered it as well. As for poor Ozment, he acknowledged in his letter to the council that his original hope of finding the docile Anna and persuading her to return home and honor the agreement with her siblings had been thoroughly dashed. He now recommended that the council make no further efforts to reason with her. The kindness of kins. The old secretary's letter distills the city's view of Anna's tossing of the agreement, and the official response to her equally bumptious allegation of foul play on the part of the council itself. Later, legal documents submitted by the council and Anna's siblings to the Imperial Commission inquiring into her case provide additional information on the circumstances of the agreement and council's role in its creation. Particularly revealing are the allegations by her brother and sister, which, far from showing a spirit of compromise, were intended to deny her any inheritance whatsoever. Philip and Agatha claimed to have helped their father draft his testament and to know its circumstances well. At the time of Hermann Buschler's death, both were convinced that Anna had no legal claim to a maternal inheritance and only a scant one to a paternal or family inheritance. The maternal inheritance had already been settled by the agreement signed with her father in 1528 and by the council's ruling in 1534, directing her eventual compensation for Lindenhof. And as for a paternal or family inheritance, their father's testament left no doubt about his wishes for the disposition of his estate. Philip and Agatha believed that those wishes overrode any natural or prior right to such an inheritance Anna might invoke as an immediate blood relative. Indeed, the preamble of the testament unequivocally renounced all prior testament statements made by their father, including the marriage contract of 1495. All this notwithstanding, the father did believe that Anna should get something, so out of fatherly kindness, as Philip and Agatha put it, and in consultation with them, he had bequeathed Anna what, in light of her scandalous behavior, the three in concert deemed to be a proper portion within the law. What is left unsaid, however, but was well understood by all three at the time, is that the testament awarded Anna as little of the family estate as her father thought the law required. Why, if her siblings believed that their sister had been treated properly and fairly in their father's testament, did they subsequently agree to increase her portion after his death? In explaining their turnabout, they protested that they too had cause and legal right to enforce their father's stringent testament against her. It was not because law or justice required it of them that they subsequently attempted to rescue her from the legal limbo into which she had plunged herself by signing the restrictive agreement with their siblings. Their action now, like their father's earlier, was said to be an expression of kindness to their sister, one they calculated would have enabled her, solely on condition of her friendly cooperation, to increase her legal portion to more than 3 times what her father had decreed, thus gaining more than half of the legal third. As her siblings recalled the discussion leading to the agreement, Anna had participated fully, and with the counsel of 3 legally astute relatives, her uncle and former Bürgermeister Conrad Buschler Sr., and her first cousins Conrad Buschler Jr. and Hans Hohenberger, both experienced politicians at Hohl and Rothenburg respectively. Also during the proceedings, and at her own request, she had sworn an oath of citizenship and paid the required fee for its rights and privileges, thereby formally placing herself under the authority and protection of the city council. And throughout it all, she had remained friendly with her siblings, and after signing the agreement, she personally thanked those who had drawn it up. And in the weeks following, she was back and forth to her brother Philip's house. She even invited his children to dine with her at her house on Gelbinger Street outside the city wall. That date, however, was not kept, because before it could arrive, Anna had hastily departed Hall for Hohenlohe and Speyer, where she set in motion the litigation that now engulfed them all. It was no mystery to her siblings why Anna suddenly concluded that the agreement was a fraud and fled. Philip's refusal to pay the new debts that she continued to accumulate had precipitated the new crisis. In the weeks after signing the agreement, she had given Philip a list of debts he was then obligated to pay, which by all accounts he dutifully set about paying. When new bills for purchases of silver and fabric arrived at his door, however, he refused to honor them. The agreement explicitly excluded the payment of such debts, and Philip was quick to complain to the council that his sister was ignoring its terms. In response, the council summoned Anna and rebuked her, reiterating to her that her siblings were obligated to pay up to 1,200 gulden of the debt existing at the time of the agreement, not new debts incurred thereafter as well. Philip claimed to have relented for the sake of peace at this early stage of the agreement, paying the first wave of new debts anyway, while at the same time indicating to Anna that he would not do so again. It was only at this point, her siblings claimed, that Anna discovered the agreement to be a swindle and returned to the courts. Recalling these same events, Anna told a completely different story, one of conspiracy and coercion, reaching to the highest levels of city government. In her version, her siblings had grabbed all the family property and possessions for themselves upon the death of their father, justifying their actions by his testament, which Anna claimed never to have seen or read, despite repeated requests for a copy. But being impoverished and recently widowed, she was in no position to fight back. So she let herself be saddled with an agreement that gave her little and forbade her from asking for more. As she resisted her siblings at this time, she was convinced they would have enforced, as they repeatedly threatened to do, the stringent terms of their father's testament. That would have given her only a fraction of what she believed to be rightfully hers, the despicable third of a third, or approximately 1/9 of the true estate, as she calculated, so as in 1528, when her father forced her to settle for less than what she deemed to be a fair maternal inheritance, she now seized the partial loaf her siblings offered, lest she be left with her father's paltry slice. Yet all the while she believed she was entitled to a great deal more, and remained determined to get it. Anna's version of events further maintains that she initiated private discussions with her siblings and made informal appeals to the city council before giving up on the agreement and departing Hall. In the recollections of her siblings and councilmen, however, the contacts and conversations Anna initiated at this time were superficial and not in good faith. Anna, on the other hand, distinctly remembered making the case to her siblings that her father's disinheritance of her was illegal on the grounds that it contradicted the parental marriage contract, which Anna now insisted held legal priority over her father's testament. Had that primal document, which placed strict limits on each parent's freedom to dispose of family property, been enforced, as both parents had originally intended it to be, Anna believed she would have received a full and equal share of family land and movables. Even apart from the marriage contract, Anna argued that the law did not permit a father to ignore the needs of a natural child, nor to apportion testamentary property, legata, selectively from his estate. Wrongdoing, she believed, her father knowingly committed, hence her reference to his testament as an alleged testament. Had her father not given favored son Philip many thousand gulden beyond what she and Agatha received? Was not testamentary property illegally awarded to Philip without any consultation with or compensation of the other heirs? According to law, a testator is obliged to leave his entire livelihood to the children as their legal and proper portion. Anna lectured her siblings at the last hearing before her death. Another possible legal argument Anna might well have invoked to good effect was a qualifying clause in the law permitting a father to disinherit a daughter who opposed his will in marriage. By that law, if a father with a daughter under 25 years of age, acting in accordance with his position and wealth, made a good faith effort to arrange a proper marriage for her, only then to have her reject his efforts and refuse his choice, defiantly electing instead to lead an unchaste life, then he could disinherit her. However, it could be shown that a father had been negligent, not arranged a proper marriage for a daughter within the time determined by law, that is, before she turned 25, then the daughter could not be disinherited because of any subsequent unchaste behavior on her part, which by then would have to be attributed as much to paternal neglect as to natural desire. As the Schwabenspiegel, a law code dating from the 13th century put it, she might lose her honor after 25, but she could not lose her inheritance. Whether Hermann Buschler had done all he could and should to find Anna a suitable mate became a major issue in the two parties' assessment of blame for her scandalous behavior. Even though the above law precisely summarized Hermann Buschler's view of the matter, and its qualifying clause nicely stated Anna's, neither side ever invoked it. That this legal course was not pursued is perhaps best explained by its double-edged nature, both sides perceiving it to be mutually negating. So while Anna blamed her behavior and her father's refusal to recognize any of her suitors as worthy of her, she defended her right to a full inheritance by appealing to her parents' marriage contract and to natural law. Likewise, her father insisted she had rejected all possible husbands he could find, yet he based his legal case on her full disobedience of his parental authority and her public shaming of the family and the community. In the end, none of Anna's arguments against her father's disinheritance prevailed. Convinced that her siblings were determined to leave her with the crumbs of her father's testament, should she resist them, she silently did as she was told in 1543. Publicly at the time, she persisted in portraying herself as a poor, abandoned widow besieged by creditors with no one to turn to, forced in the end by her poverty, fear, and inexperience to take what seemed at the moment to be as good as she was ever going to get. Only later, in the clear light of day, when the provisions of the agreement began to be implemented contrary to her expectations, did she discover how completely fooled she had been. Whereas her siblings portrayed their sister's glass as more than half full, Anna described it as more than half empty, exactly reversing their alleged proportions. She decried the agreement for denying her not only more than half of what was just, but 3 times as much and more. On the single occasion when she mentions a specific figure, she accuses her siblings of cheating her out of more than 2,000 gulden of her father's estate. As far as Anna was now concerned, the agreement of 1543 had been a charade from the start, shrewdly orchestrated by 3 of the most powerful men in Hull: her brother, city secretary Ozment, document's chief draftsman, and Leonard Fuchter, soon to become the new Bürgermeister. And with Ozment, the city official appointed by the council to advise her during the negotiations, Anna portrays her brother, who was soon to become Bürgermeister, as Hull's leading councilman and the man everyone then feared. Hence one in a position to work his will on the council, given the support of Ozment, who also had very good reason to dislike Anna. Clearly, Philip had the most to gain from an agreement that masked his father's bias toward him in apportioning the family inheritance. At the same time, the agreement promised to silence the only person, Anna, who had a reason to challenge Herman Buschler's disposition of his estate. In Anna's opinion, Philip and his allies had played with a deck that could not have been more prejudicially stacked. Anna might have well said of her father in the mid-1520s what she now said of her brother in the early 1540s, for her father had then been a heroic and unblemished man whom everyone respected and feared. And he too had successfully worked his will on earth through the courts, thanks to strategically placed allies. The parallel between the 2 episodes may have crossed Anna's mind in a disturbing moment of hindsight. Anna also claimed to have had no say whatsoever in the selection of the men who drafted the agreement with her siblings, nor of the city officials and relatives who advised her during the proceedings. In the end, she was presented with a finished document and instructed to sign it unread. As was also the case with her father's testament, she alleged that she had neither seen nor read the agreement, her requests for a copy again going unanswered by the council. She remembered on the day of the signing being in the council room with her brother and sister, her court-appointed advisors, and the men who drafted the agreement. When instructed to sign the finished document, she had hesitated as if to protest, whereupon, at her brother's signal, a guard had entered the room and was ordered to take her away to the tower. What? It was at that moment, Anna claimed, that Ozment had pressed the quill into her hand and stood over her as she signed the agreement at the place indicated to her. All right, brovs, goodbye.